Train Sim World 2 was released in August 2020, and with it came the first London Underground route that Dovetail Games ever made. Now the route is 3 years old, but whether or not it has aged well is up for debate. This is my 2 cents on the London Underground Bakerloo Line add-on. I will be drawing comparisons with the old Circle Line simulator, otherwise known as World of Subways Volume 3. Both recreations of the London Underground have their good and bad aspects. The Bakerloo Line is now available as a standalone DLC for the soon-to-be obsolete Train Sim World 3, costing 37 New Zealand dollars at the normal price. But when I started writing the script for this review, you could get the route for an insane 80% off in the Steam Summer Sale, only paying $7.39 NZD. Consider yourself lucky if you were able to buy the route during the sale. I remember initially thinking that, for whatever reason, Dovetail wouldn't include the entire Bakerloo Line. Despite their annoying tendency to needlessly cut off certain sections of track, looking at you Long Island Railroad and Harlem Line, I was an idiot to think they would do the same to the Bakerloo Line, because they did indeed provide the entire 14.4 miles of track from Elephant and Castle to Harrow and Wealdstone. As for how the line got its name, that's a combination of Baker Street and Waterloo, so in other words, a bizarre Jerry Rafferty and ABBA medley. There are 25 stations on this line, of which 15 are underground. Starting out at Elephant and Castle, you'll stay underground until just after leaving Kilburn Park, then you'll leave the tunnel just south of Queen's Park Station. The overground section to Harrow and Wealdstone is quite unusual, because the 1972 stock runs on the same track as the London Overground's Watford DC line. I don't know how they pull this off, since the tube and mainline trains run on different electrification systems. Unfortunately, neither the Class 378 Electrostar nor Class 710 Aventra EMUs are included in TSW, nor are any of the trains that you'd normally see running on the nearby West Coast Main Line, such as the Class 350 Desiros and Class 390 Pendolinos. Although I understand why those trains weren't included, it still just doesn't look or feel the same when you're standing at South Kenton and not seeing any passenger trains rushing past on the West Coast Main Line. Unsurprisingly, only one train is included with this add-on, and that's the London Underground 1972 stock. These units have been in service for 51 years at the time of uploading, making them the oldest trains still in regular passenger service on the tube. The design of these units is somewhat unusual, as they are directly based on the now retired 1967 stock from the Victoria Line, sharing the same issue regarding the lack of cab-side doors. And for some reason, the front door in-game does not work unless you install a little patch for it, a link in the description. By default, the train is supplied in the modern London Underground livery, but you can get a payware reskin for the 72 stock that adds the early unpainted aluminium with red doors livery. I've already discussed this reskin in a previous video. An edition this small should not be payware. The iconic 1938 stock is also available as an add-on for this route, although the route is set in the wrong time period for this design. And to say that Rivet Games did a piss-poor job with this thing would be a big understatement. Despite the improved graphics and overall gameplay, some features that were present in the Circle Line simulator are absent in Train Sim World. For starters, there are working announcements on the C stock in World of Subways 3, a game that was first released in May 2011, and those devs pulled it off without needing to license the original announcement recordings.
This is Aldgate. Please mind the gap between the train and the platform. This is a Circle Line train to Hammersmith via Liverpool Street and King's Cross and Pancras.
You can see a very similar looking announcement module in the 72 stock's cab, and yet Dovetail didn't even try to implement the working announcements 9 years after the people behind World of Subways 3 managed it. When you're riding in the passenger saloon, the lack of announcements and silent lucidity sorry, I meant to say silent NPCs. Their silence and the lack of announcements ruin the immersion because they make the interior feel unnaturally quiet. Not helping the situation are the poor quality sounds on the 1972 stock. While the whistle and door beeps are accurate, I swear the motor sounds are recycled from the Class 455-9 in Train Simulator Classic. That add-on was made by Thomson Interactive and released in 2011. I guess that, in 2020, there would have been certain restrictions preventing Dovetail from getting all the right recordings from the 1972 stock, but it's still a very questionable decision to use, what were then, 9-year-old recordings from a completely different train. The original timetable for this route wasn't good at all, with trains only running every 20 to 40 minutes, horrendously unrealistic for the London Underground. More recently, although they certainly took their sweet time to add it, Dovetail did update the route with a realistic timetable. Now the trains south of Queen's Park run every 2 to 5 minutes, with services terminating at Stonebridge Park running every 10 minutes, and services going all the way to Harrow Wealdstone only running every 15 minutes. With all of the trains coming and going, either to and from the sidings or up to Stonebridge Park and Harrow and Wealdstone, I would say that Queen's Park is perhaps the busiest station on the entire line. The stations are all reasonably well modelled, and look just like their real-life counterparts, albeit with the exceptions of inaccurate signs at Willesden Junction High Level and Harrow and Wealdstone. South of Queen's Park, each station has its own unique tile pattern on the platforms, with my personal favourite being at Piccadilly Circus. Little details like the proper underground signage, in-coach line diagrams and labels in the cab are much appreciated as well. There are also plenty of posters and signs on the stations, but it's mostly fictional advertising, and said fictional advertising can be replaced by real ones with a texture patch. But speaking of real things, Dovetail correctly modelled Wembley Stadium, which is visible from the southern end of Stonebridge Park Station. The curved platform edges are not smooth, and look jarring as a result. But one of the worst platforms I saw was at Waterloo. Surely the gap between the train and the platform isn't anywhere near this wide in real life. At other stations, the trains visibly clip through the platform edge. In some ways, World of Subways 3 is actually a better rendition of the London Underground than what Dovetail tried to do in TSW. Granted, that older game is a recreation of the subsurface Circle Line instead of the Bakerloo Line, and the C stock is very different to the 1972 stock, but that older game has more immersive sounds at the stations, while those in TSW are borderline silent. I'll show you some footage from each game so that you can see what I mean. Something else I noticed was the similar cab controls across both the C77 and 1972 stock, specifically the reverser, traction brake controller, and announcement module. This doesn't really surprise me, since both types were built by Metro Camel of Birmingham, although the C stock first entered service 2 years ahead of the 72s. And let's not forget the aforementioned announcements. Their absence in TSW ironically makes the more modern game feel like a downgrade. And if you've had experience with both games, feel free to let me know which one you prefer in the comments. But the good thing about TSW is that, unlike in World of Subways 3, you won't fall through the ground and teleport into your train if you try to walk along the track. and there's no annoying first-person camera that keeps bobbing about when you're trying to film a train passing by. But there is an invisible wall preventing you from walking through the tunnels between stations on the underground section south of Queen's Park. With the updated timetable, there are a total of 843 timetable mode services available for the 1972 stock. Amongst the regular passenger services, you also get to do empty stock moves to and from London Road and Stonebridge Park depots. London Road depot is very unusual because, despite being located near the southern end of the line, it's out in the open. Trains can only reach the depot by going onto a short and steeply graded branch that leaves the main line just south of Waterloo Station, with the speed limit in the depot being a measly 5 miles per hour. Driving the 1972 stock can be challenging, especially if you're not familiar with this unit, or, in my case, it's been ages since you last drove it on a regular basis. She can accelerate and decelerate very quickly despite her age, and I found that, in several cases, you can still enter the platforms at the speed limit and still slow down in time to stop in the right place. These are 7-car units, but the platforms south of Queen's Park are only just long enough to fit the entire train. This is one of those routes where there isn't much margin for error, due to the intensity of the service. Although it wouldn't be too difficult for anyone to do better than Jeff Marshall's driving skills for that time he went to Dovetail's office to meet Matt Peddleston and try out the game. If you haven't seen that video yet, I'll put a link to it in the top right corner. These units have a top speed of 45 miles per hour, but this is very rarely achieved, and certainly not on the underground section, where you will be lucky to reach even 35. There's just enough space between South Kenton, and Harrow and Wealdstone for the train to reach her top speed, even if only briefly before you need to slam on the brakes for the next station. Another thing that's worth remembering is the speed limit signs. South of Queen's Park, you can accelerate to a higher speed limit as soon as the front of your train passes the board, but on the National Rail track north of Queen's Park, you must wait until the back of your train has passed the board before accelerating to the new speed limit. There's an annoying glitch at some of the stations, such as Waterloo, Baker Street and Paddington, where the signal at the end of the platform will stay red and not change to green until you've opened or closed the doors. I didn't think the signals would do this in real life, and why the bug still hasn't been fixed after all this time is anyone's guess. The scenery throughout most of the above ground section is fairly basic, and indeed I noticed a few cases where there are a lot of the same building assets copied and pasted over and over again. But the worst bit of scenery that I noticed was up near the northern end, between South Kenton and Kenton. On the other side of that white fence, there's a massive area with an ugly flat grass texture that only has a few trees scattered about, if you're lucky. Even though it's something I can't really see if I'm staying in the cab, knowing that it's still there still spoils the immersion. Now, would I recommend this route to another player, or someone just starting out with TSW? To the latter camp, I say, get out while you still can, unless you want to bleed your wallet dry, or run the risk of bleeding your wallet dry. No, I do not recommend this add-on. While it's good to have the London Underground represented in TSW, I still think Dovetail made a very poor choice when they decided to make the Bakerloo of all tube lines. They should have made the much longer Piccadilly line with the 1973 stock, and preferably had it set sometime between 1975 and 1994, when the Alderwich branch was still open. Or perhaps make the Northern line as it was when the 1959 stock was still in service. Both the Piccadilly and Northern lines have multiple branches, in stark contrast to the linear Bakerloo line. In my opinion, TSW does have better graphics than World of Subways 3, but in the words of Maverick Hunter Daniel, just because it looks good doesn't mean it is good. Dovetail's rendition of the Bakerloo Line is nowhere near the gold standard of London Underground simulators due to the lack of functionality on the 1972 stock, especially when compared to the C stock, not to mention the route's restrictive linear nature.